A lot more people expected, but what we discovered over the course of the last 24 hours is that a lot of people have trouble finding this place. So when you leave, what you should do is leave breadcrumbs so that the next crowd can actually find their way in. It's my pleasure to introduce a dear friend of mine and the sponsor of the whole day of Visionary Women screenings, my friend Susan Bodine. Sue.
Hi, everybody. I don't want to take credit for personally being the sponsor, but it is, I'm a lawyer, and my firm, Cowan Debates Abrahamson Shepherd, otherwise known as CDAS, is sponsoring this day, probably because of my long-standing membership in the unofficial New York indie community, which certainly predates actually when I was at this firm, but still goes back to really the 80s, in the sort of late 80s when I was a beginning lawyer, and it just happened, fortunately, that it coincided with kind of the flowering moments of New York indie film. And so I was able to kind of just get very involved with a lot of really interesting people and clients and projects that were just beginning to find their way on what to do and how to get made and how to get the money and how to get distributed, how to get marketed. And of course, those questions are still being asked today, and the landscape is very different, but a lot of the questions are really the same. And one of the early highlights for me was a film that I was able to work on with a client of mine, Nancy Savoca, whose movie True Love in 1989 won the Grand Jury Award at what was then called the United States Film Festival. Now we know it as Sundance. So this was very exciting and fabulous. Unfortunately, Nancy wasn't there. She was giving birth to her first child, so I had to call her on the phone and actually tell her while she was in labor that she just won the prize. But in the process of having that film kind of come out to the world and get distributed, I was able to meet really just the whole sort of landscape of indie distribution, distributors who were out there at the time. A lot of the companies are no longer there, but certainly one of the ones that was very prominent and really became quite important was Cinecom, and through that I met Ira Deutchman. And since I've known Ira since then, we've worked in many different capacities together. He's produced and distributed and marketed others of my clients' films, including Nancy's film Household Saints and John Sayles' films. And he's also been a client. In fact, he sort of still is. A long gestating project. When he produced a film, I think that was in 1992, I'm not sure, called Lulu on the Bridge, which was Paul Auster's directorial debut. And then we have been comrades in arms, so to speak, doing a lot of traveling, conferences and seminars, mostly in Latin America through a mutual friend of ours who puts on these conferences. And I've had numbers of caipirinhas on the beach with Ira in Rio, and that certainly counts as an indie film experience. So it's been a really wonderful time to see that this is happening now, where there's this kind of appreciation and celebration of what Ira has brought to this industry, which is a lot. And I'm really, really happy and proud to be part of it. So thank you.
And now to introduce the movie, The President of New York Women in Film. Did I get that right? Executive Director of New York Women in Film, Terry Lawler.
My fans are here. Thank you for that. I'm really happy to be here introducing Joan's film. Joan Micklin Silver was one of the founding members of New York Women in Film and Television. So it's really great to be here to honor her and introduce the film. Joan is a really important part of the independent film movement and the independent film world. Her work stands out just as films, as a filmmaker, but they're also really important films made by women. So it's really interesting, and I'm so glad that this film is being shown. She's made some very unforgettable films: Hester Street, Between the Lines, Crossing Delancey. So if you haven't seen them, you should definitely check them out. One of the things she has done consistently in her work, and she does here also, is to really pay attention to the details that make up an ordinary person's life or her characters' ordinary lives. And that gives the film authenticity that's really important to the empathy you feel for the characters. The performances are wonderful in this film. The leads, John Hurd and Mary Beth Hurt, are really great. And Mark Metcalf, Griffin Dunne, and Amy Robinson are also in it, and they also produced the film, and they will be here later for a Q&A along with Mary Beth Hurd, we think, and a couple of, I think, another actor. Peter Riegert, and so that'll be very, very interesting talk, I think. Also in the film was Gloria Grahame, who you may know was very well known for her work in the film noir films of the 40s and the 50s. She was also a very talented comedic actress. She was in Oklahoma, for instance, and you'll see that she's a talented comedic actress in this film. If you want to know more, by the way, about Gloria Grahame, this is an aside, there's a wonderful movie that was made about the last year of her life called Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool, so you should check that out too. One of the interesting things about this film, which maybe we'll talk about during the Q&A, is that it was released twice. It was originally released as Head Over Heels by United Artists, and it did not do well, and it was shelved. And then 3 years later, Ira was part of a group of people at United Artists Classics. It was United Artists Classics, yeah, who resurrected it and changed the ending, which had been a happy ending. That was changed, and they retitled it to the same title that the book it was based on, Chilly Scenes of Winter. So with that title and that ending, the film became a great art house success. So I think you'll enjoy it.
Producers of the film, Amy Robinson, Mark Metcalf, and Griffin Dunne. And one of the stars of the film, Peter Riegert. Not to mention Ira Deutchman, for whom we are all here. So we're going to need one more chair.
We look exactly the same.
Okay.
We haven't seen each other. Hey, Mark.
Griffin.
Peter,
I see Peter all the time.
congratulations, young man.
Good.
Great. Wow. You're so young.
Thanks, Griffin. I'm not.
Please come in, have a seat.
Where would you like us to sit,
Sit
Jack?
wherever you feel like sitting.
You can sit in the audience, it wouldn't
Yeah,
matter.
why don't we
Oh, well, sorry, we got one more here.
Like your shoes.
Oh, thank you.
No, I do.
Thank you.
So, Mark
We were
and
really young.
Mark and Amy and Griffin, this story really starts with you. How did you come to? You were in the mid-70s. You were actors. You hadn't produced anything.
Now
How
we
did you
actually
come to
are.
option this Ann Beattie book, Chilly Scenes of Winter?
Amy read it and loved it, and we were all three sort of, I would say we were kind of having a Jules and Jim's, a Jules et Jim summer, or fall, summer,
Yeah.
was it summer?
Summer.
And she read this book and she said, read it, I think we should make a movie out of it, and we read it, and in the spirit of Jules et Jim, we said, yeah, sure, we can make a movie.
Well,
And
we were actually,
Uh,
oh, I have one.
Yeah.
We were remember we were trying to do Cowboy Mouth.
Oh, that's right, we were gonna do a
Sam
Sam
Shepard
Shepard
play.
play, yeah, that's right,
So
I'd forgotten
We
that.
were working on Cowboy Mouth and, anyhow,
And we were, Amy and I were mostly unemployed actors. I was working at Radio City Music Hall. And Mark was the only actual working actor who was in Animal House.
With Peter. With Peter, that's
With
right.
Peter. And who had the money so we could option it. And we were able to option it because the three of us drove up to Harvard, where Ann Beattie was teaching. And we called from like the corner and said, we want to talk to you about your book. And she let us in, and she said it was like 3 characters from her books walked into her living room.
She was great, I French kissed her dog.
Yeah, we drank a bit.
And
we were drinking.
And we asked her a drink, and she brought tumblers of vodka.
Vodka, lots
Like
of
the way the
vodka.
Russians drink it.
And Mark, I think we were able to option the book for $2,000, which was, I think, your whole salary.
That was my salary, yeah.
Yeah.
Animal House.
And she had a very,
And Animal House was just this
Second movie.
odd little, well, but
Oh, it
odd
hadn't come
little-
out yet, right?
Enough-
It had not come out.
It had not come out, and no one knew what it was. It was just all these weird people that we knew, basically,
Right.
who John Landis had decided, except for poor Griffin,
Yeah,
who wanted to
I
play really
auditioned.
badly. Anyhow,
but she had a very powerful agent named H.L. Swanson, who
Right.
represented like Hemingway and Dashiell Hammett and all these people. He's an older guy. And she called, also drunk, and spoke to her agent and said, there are these 3 people here, I really want them to option the book, and I want them to have it, and they promised me I could be in the movie if I could wear a beehive hairdo. And
She wanted to wear some 42-inch falsies too that she had.
yeah, then she had falsies, and it was just like, I want to be an extra, and that's what I want to look like.
Didn't she also say she wanted to meet Dean Martin?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that we
the way
didn't
I
come through
remember
on.
it, yeah, and
Yeah.
Griffin actually arranged that.
And you could hear her agent screaming at her through the phone, going, what are you, crazy? What are you crazy? You know, anyway, she stuck to her word and gave the option to 3 actors who'd never produced a movie before.
but we learned or at least I did, a very good lesson, which is if you want to be a producer, it's all about the material. That's what you have.
Right.
And so we had optioned this book, and we didn't quite know what to do after that. And then we got a call from a wonderful writer that we knew very well named Michael Weller. And Michael Weller said, it was in the trades, because H.L. Swanson
He'd always liked
put
it.
an ad in the trade, an article, and said that these 3 people optioned this book. And so Michael Weller said, well, I'd like to write and direct it, and I'm working with Milos Forman, and
On
he will
Ragtime.
executive
On
produce it.
Mm-hmm.
So then we got on a plane and went to the desert,
Went to Bakersfield.
Bakersfield, and where he was shooting Hair.
All right.
And I mean,
That fell apart.
that fell apart, and then we got a call from Joan Micklin Silver, who was the only possible bankable woman who was working in the movie business, or let's say in the traditional movie business. And she said, I love this book, and
And she was barely bankable.
well, she was
She
a
was a
very
known
bankable
quantity, but-
writer, and certainly, because this
She's made
was,
2 features already.
yes, she'd made 2 features and they were successful, and every studio in town took a meeting with us. So this, though this is part of the indie film series, it wasn't exactly an indie film because we actually got the money from Hollywood to make the movie.
You set the film up at United Artists.
First at
First at Fox with Claire Townsend. It was fun. And then when she moved to United Artists, she moved from she used to have business cards that said from the chair of Claire, because all she had was a cart full of books and scripts and a chair, and she would go around and find a corner somewhere. So, and she then got a job at United Artists, and we followed her over there, because she was a real champion.
She really had a lot to do with it getting made.
Yeah.
And how did the cast come together? Mark and Peter, you'd worked together in Animal House. Is that how Peter came to be in the movie?
No, I was, my memory was that I was good friends with John, with Hurd, and I knew he was doing this. I had tried to get an audition for Between the Lines.
Which John was in, which was
John
John's
was
previous
in.
movie.
We had met in, I can't remember, 72 or 3. And Joan had seen me in a play called Sexual Diversity in Chicago that David Mamet had written. And, you know, we were all snobs when we were younger. I thought, I don't know if I auditioned, but I couldn't get in on that movie. And then I was talking, and John was telling me about this getting started. Actually, Mark told me while we were doing Animal House. He said, oh yeah, I'm producing a movie with a couple of actor friends of mine. I said, oh, that's fantastic. And I, like an idiot, I didn't pursue it. Anyway, long story short, I couldn't get an audition for Joan. And I said to John, why? Because he really got me in. This is what I remember. And she wanted Jeff Goldblum. That's what John said.
Who had also been in Between the Lines.
Right. And John kept plumping for me. See, Riegert, he's perfect for this. And Joan kept saying, I just keep seeing a taller actor. And John said, are you fucking nuts? Nobody's gonna tell how tall anybody is. It's a movie. Anyway, I got an audition. That's how I got the job, through John. I mean, it was his effort to convince her that a short Jeff Goldblum was as good as a tall Jeff Goldblum.
Well, and also, I think it was fantastically, Joan had obviously worked with John, but we were friends with John and with Peter,
Yeah.
because we all basically spent our entire life in a bar called the Cafe Central.
Right.
And,
So that was actually later, because we shot it in '77.
oh, wasn't the Central?
We weren't, yeah, we did a lot of different bars on the Upper West
Okay,
Side.
but we only wanted John. And
From the
then-
beginning, even before Joan, we wanted John.
We wanted John, and then Joan wanted John, so it was sort of like incredible kismet.
And Mary Beth Hurd had already been nominated for a Tony. She'd just done Woody Allen's Interiors. How did you come to her?
We saw a lot of, yeah.
Meryl Streep wanted to do the movie. She read it. We took it to her. She read it. We'd seen her in Deer Hunter. She wanted to move, but she didn't want to do it with John. She wanted to do it with Sam Waterston. And we wanted John. So we said, so long, it's been good to know you. It would have been a completely different movie, not nearly as sort of dark and ulcer producing.
Ulster or ulcer?
Ulcer.
And now, how did you come to film this movie in Salt Lake City, of all places?
Well, we were going to film it in upstate New York, but
Albany.
the unions said that if we tried to make a non-union movie, we didn't have a lot of money, and we wanted to make sort of a NABIT movie or something, and they said, we will kill you. So
Yeah,
we
the
went
Teamsters
to
were really tough up there.
we went to a right-to-work state, but we shot all the interiors in Los Angeles. And we just were lucky with the snow, because when we first got there, there was no snow, and then it snowed and snowed and snowed, and we worked on the old
It was Culver City Studios.
Culver City
Which
Studios.
was Selznick Studios.
Right,
They
it was-
shot Gone with the
Our
Right.
offices were in Tara, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we had the buildings were all falling down and rickety, but the stages were all there, and that his whole house was a set.
Marty was shooting Raging Bull.
Was shooting Raging Bull in one of the stages. The boxing stuff was all shot there. And he had black dugatine, all around there. I know because I snuck onto the set.
I thought that was later. I got
Yeah,
so
that was there.
confused. Anyway, and we had a lot of very young crew members, but also very old crew members. I remember that our still photographer, his mother had been the continuity woman on Birth of a Nation.
Oh, my God.
We had like the oldest IA
And
crew.
the dolly grip was a grip on Touch of Evil.
Wow.
Right. Yeah, we had and Paul Helmick,
Helmick,
who really saved our ass.
really.
20 times a day.
He was our line producer.
He was a line producer, production manager. He had started out with Howard Hawks as a second AD, I think, and became on Atari, one of Hawks' last movies, was listed as a producer, but he worked with Hawks, and he knew everything. He was completely unflappable, whereas we were very flappable. I was.
Mark was particularly flappable. Remember, you got very sick.
Yeah, I got mononucleosis from exhaustion because I was so flappy.
The real classic movie gem involved with this, though, was Gloria Grahame.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask,
I mean,
what was it
that
like
was-
working with her? Peter, you had scenes with her.
Well, I couldn't believe I was, actually in '77, when we were out there shooting, it wasn't, there was still a lot of Hollywood movie stars around. And we were, 30, 31 too. I mean, it was amazing who you could run into. So the fact that Gloria Grahame was in this movie just blew me away. I thought it was a great story. Every element of it was fantastic, but, I'm a movie fan first, so I was a total sucker. And
she kissed you in the mouth, which means that, you kissed Jimmy Stewart.
I kissed Humphrey Bogart, as a matter of fact. I don't fuck around. I've kissed a lot of good people. Anyway, that kiss, we didn't rehearse that. Whatever you saw there, that's my reaction, which was, what the hell is that? But I thought the costume was so genius. A satin dress with sneakers. I mean, brilliant.
Well, she went to, she had all those nightgowns made from her tailor or seamstress who had made all of her costumes from the 30s and the 40s
Oh, I didn't
in
know. That's
Beverly
great.
Hills. Yes,
Yeah.
that was all her doing, those
Yeah.
incredible.
How did you get to her?
I think we called her agent. We
saw
wanted
her.
her.
It's a young blonde.
We watched In a Lonely Place one night. I think
Yeah.
Amy saw it on television, late night or early show or something, and said, watch this, so we watched it and we went. She was living in England. The period of time that Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool
It
takes
was
place.
after
Right.
that.
Which she's played by Annette Bening.
Yes.
I saw that movie last year.
She also had a bit of an affair with John during the movie.
Had a bit of what?
An affair with John.
Oh, yes, no, I know. We made John move out of his living situation with Margot Kidder, whom he was married to, because he had trouble making it down from Malibu. And he moved into a hotel in the Shangri-La on, I don't know what street, Ocean?
Ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were all living there. Well, we
Where
weren't.
Amy and
We
Griffin were living.
And Mary Beth was, and John was.
And did Gloria live there?
Yeah, was living there for sometimes, but
Right.
one night I remember it was raining and I opened my door and there she was sort of going out and I said, "Where are you going, Gloria?" She said, "Well, John wants some cigarettes." And I said, "You do not have to go get John her cigarettes in the rain."
And so now, was it?
I'd done streamers with Kenny McMillan, if you're running through the cast, who I think is also, it's so great to see Kenny, because he's so brilliant in this and always, and I'd done streamers in New York at the Newhouse Theater with him, and so it was really a nice little family.
So now, the book ends in sort of an ambiguous way, and the movie, you had the original ending, Charles and Laura end up together. Was there any discussion about that before you shot the movie?
Yes, so we were first at United Artists Major. We're getting to Ira. And we were first there, and they, even our relationship there, we were sort of non-existent. We were a small movie, and they had a really big, important, incredible movie that's going to do incredibly well called Heaven's Gate. And so we were totally ignored, which was great.
Except they made us change our title.
But they made us change our title right when it got down to it. They wanted a happy ending. And they changed the title from Chilly Scenes of Winter to something called Head Over Heels. And the ad that they came up with was John wearing glasses that had windshield wipers that went by. It was hideous.
Not even the same glasses he wears in the picture.
Yeah, and it was very disappointing. And the the movie had a very, it came out during the newspaper strike. Remember that? Because we were like passing out flyers in front of the theater.
Peter and all of us got, I don't know if it was because of the newspaper strike, but people weren't going, so we stood at a street corner and passed out flowers like it was an off-Broadway play.
It was, which theater was it?
It was at the
Cinema
theater.
One?
Cinema One,
It was
yeah,
at Cinema One.
on Third Avenue.
And, but the interesting thing about the end of the book was, and Joan was always disturbed by this. I mean, I think Joan both directed beautifully, because the performances are wonderful, but she wrote a really fantastic script.
I was amazed watching and listening to it again, because I haven't seen it for a long time, of how she inhabits Anne. I mean, it's really a perfect synthesis of Anne and Joan.
And at the end of the book, the ending is very bittersweet. You don't really feel they're gonna stay together. You feel kind of that she's kind of disturbed and he's kind of disturbed, and it's very sad. But when we shot it, it was much more saccharine, I guess it would be a word.
You
And
can
Joan,
actually watch it on YouTube.
Joan is
So you
not.
can watch the original end, the head over heels ending?
They do.
Interesting. So Joan was never happy about it. Enter UA Classics. I mean, it was like a miracle. The movie came out, it was, it disappeared.
I was in,
immediately.
they sent me on it came out in the winter, right, in like November, December, something like that. Anyway, they sent me to 4 cities, Minneapolis, Chicago. I mean, it was fucking cold. It was really cold. Anyway, I came back. When I was in Minneapolis, sidebar, I realized they have tunnels and walkways because it's so cold.
So you never go outside.
So I go outside. Anyway, I come back, and movies were still new to me. So I went to the theater to see how business was. And I went up to the, I guess it was the manager, and he said, you know, business is growing, but we're pulling the movie. I said, what are you talking about? We just got here. And you said it's doing well. They said they want to release Black Stallion.
Black Sunday?
Black Stallion.
Black Stallion.
And I called, I think it was you, I think I called Griffin or Amy, and they were in a meeting in Los Angeles with United as I was calling, right? Isn't that what happened? And I think we got one more week, and then we had no backing, though. We had no.
So Ira, how much later was it was it a year later?
It was almost 2 years later.
2 years later?
But it had become sort of a cult hit in Boston, right? Because it got a good review in the Boston Phoenix.
It did get a good review in the Boston Phoenix. It may have, cult hit is a relative phrase, but it may have been, I don't.
Yeah, I think we heard that it was that it was becoming, you know, that they were bringing it back to the Orson Welles cinema or whatever it was, and it was kind of what gave us the idea. But you know, we were given the charge.
You were at United Artists Classics.
Yeah, I was working at UA Classics, and our boss, this guy.
Were you, I never understood, were you UA Classics? Were you running it, or were you just,
I was in charge of marketing.
okay.
Yeah, and the guy who I reported to, Nathaniel T. Quitt Jr., he really wanted to be running the studio, and he was using us as pawns to try to prove to the upper echelon at United Artists that he was capable of doing it. So he was encouraging us to go through the UA catalog to find opportunities, and Chili Scenes just was like asking for it. I mean, it was just, and I think I remember hearing about the fact that it was doing some business in Boston, and I can't remember, I spoke to one of you, and that's when I first heard about the ending being potentially different. Or no, I'm sorry, it was Joan.
You said to Joan, I believe, and maybe to us, you said, our charge is there anything that you would like to do differently to change your film? Without reshooting. I don't think you had the budget to reshoot. And I think Joan said to you, yes, I want to cut the last scene off the movie.
Right, and I forgot, you know, another whole chapter to this is that I had known Joan for a long time. I worked on Hester Street when it was first released. I was a non-theatrical salesperson, and my job was to sell it to temples, you know, Jewish groups, stuff like that. So, and I, yes, you know, definitely put a lot of mileage on. But I became friends with Joan and Ray and had stayed in touch with them. So that was how the conversation began. But in any case, you know, to me, it's a perfect example of how when you set expectations in a certain place, it affects how people appreciate the movie. And when it was released by UA under that horrifyingly bland title,
As a romantic comedy.
I mean, the expectation level, and you know, as they made it look like it was supposed to be a really commercial movie.
And really funny.
And then you turn around 2 years later and release it as an art film, which is really what I think it always wanted to be.
Yeah.
And the expectation level's different, and people appreciated it for what it was.
It was like a miracle. I mean, who gets that chance as producers to get your movie re-released 2 years later? I mean, it's not like it was discovered 20 years later.
And to get it back, I mean, they treated it the way we had always treated it and always respected it the way we loved it. They understood that, so it got to be, yeah, we gave birth to a stillborn child, and then we got pregnant again.
I think what I find fascinating is how, I don't know if prescient is the right word, but it was the last portrait of a generation before the generation decided they wanted to be rich. I mean, they were all, it was such an anti-capitalist movie in a funny kind of way. They just didn't do anything, which is what Joan loved to write stories about.
Your character is an unemployed jacket salesman.
I would have taken the movie just for that line. But that's how good the book was, and Joan, I totally agree with you, she can write. And also cast. I've done 2 movies with Joan, plus Hester Street and a couple of the other films.
You're a star in Crossing the Landscape.
Yeah. But it's so funny. It really was a group of actors outside of Gloria, but she was a kindred spirit. That's what we were doing in the 70s. We were just kind of getting together and doing stuff. So it's not shocking that the 3 of you would be getting drunk with Ann and end up with a book deal that gets released as a movie twice. That's pretty good. But it reminds me of the theater and what we used to do.
It also made me sad watching it, because I do have to say there was a moment in time where we were very lucky that we rode a wave where the studios were still making character-based movies. And there was a 10, 15-year period, maybe a little longer, where you could do that, and they weren't high budgets, but they were character-based. And it's just, I mean, now I know there's streaming and all of that. There's a whole different reality, but it's, I've been watching a lot, we've been watching Filmstruck, and to me, this is also the tail end of Hollywood system, because when you watch the older movies, there's so much about the writing and about the characters.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, one thing that shouldn't get lost is that United Artists was actually the studio that really made an incredible number of amazing movies. And you really hit at the very end of that, because Transamerica had bought United Artists. They're the ones with the tower in San Francisco, and they're an insurance company. They had no idea what they were doing, and they were under enormous pressure to start acting like the other major studios, which was to make terrible movies. And the whole group of people who ran United Artists ended up leaving and forming a new company, and it was really, it was a moment in time.
Well, they did the greatest movies, I mean, with
They're-
Milos and Woody and Marty and, I mean.
And John did another great movie that I think was UA, which was Cutter and Bone.
Cutter and Bone was the same
Which
one.
That was another one we re-released.
It was great synchronicity, though, I thought, with doing it through United Artists, because it was a company started by 3 actors, and here we were 3 actors. They were better known than we were, but and somehow, and it was, yeah.
And they also had we were at the tail end, but they had a policy that we profited from, which was if you stayed on budget, they left you alone.
Right.
I mean, until you were done with the movie, and then they would give you notes and all of that, but they did not bother us
Yeah.
at all.
Amy's right, I mean,
Go
we
to-
made it like it was an independent movie, the way an independent movie would be made these days, but we were with a studio, but they signed off on the script, didn't even give us a whole lot of feedback on the script, as I remember. And we got to do what we wanted to do.
Let's take a couple questions from the audience. There's one right here.
Okay, terrified of public speaking, so if you do CPR, that's great. When I was on my way up here on the subway, I reread the end of the book, which I had read before Head Over Heels came out. Then I saw Head Over Heels, and I liked it very much.
You mean the original?
I saw the original at the movies. Then I saw the re-release. Here's where I'm about to have a stroke. Then I saw the re-release, and I saw it 4 times in 3 weeks.
This is our audience.
This is your audience. And I want to know if you all had the same reaction to the re-release, like, wow, what a difference, because that was my reaction.
What? I couldn't hear the question. You go ahead.
Yeah, yes, we had, I mean,
I think, you know, Amy was saying this earlier, we felt incredibly fortunate.
Oh.
And it still is remarkable to me that we got that chance. And but we had the way you, you know, felt about seeing the movie, we also felt originally about reading the book. You know, it was like this voice, it was her first novel.
Right.
And it just spoke to us, and it was just funny and sad, and just had, you know, so we, you know, in the course of, before our paths crossed with Joan, you know, we'd read this book over, and our copies were dog-eared, you know, we were determined to make it, and so pleased at how it came out, you know, particularly with the ending.
And Joan, I was hoping she'd be here, but she was great to work with on the script too, because we would sit with her during the day and talk over scenes, and then she'd go home and write again, and then we'd read them the next day, and we'd talk again. So she allowed us to collaborate in a really, I think in a way that now I don't know if it happens
Well,
these
I
days.
think what Peter was saying was it was a lot like the theater. I mean, we were all in New York. Joan and Ray were way.
Ray Silver, her husband.
Ray Silver, her husband, were way advanced, but they had a nice office, which we used to go up and hang out in and work with her. And but what you're saying is so means a lot, and quite a few people have said that about Chili Scenes, that it hit them at a time in their lives where it was about them, and that's what we felt.
Right.
When we read the book, and
she felt that when she met us, and it was all
yeah,
done.
so
I think
It was like I said, it was like an off-Broadway play where we did it for other
I'm
reasons.
sorry.
Was it the embassy on 72nd? I have a
Yes.
recollection of going repeatedly
Yes,
to the
Yes,
embassy.
it was at the embassy.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's take another question, right over here.
I'm just curious about how the film and all of you. I'm just curious about how the film and how all of you, like your relationship potentially to Anne was through the whole process. Was she involved at all? Did she like the film? Did she have anything to say? Or
She
what?
does do that scene as the waitress early on in the movie.
She liked the film very much. She was thrilled when she read the script because Joan made up the whole scene where Ox, they go to the A-frame. That was not in the book. And she went, oh my God, that's so brilliant. Because we, not being very experienced as producers, had first said to her, why don't you write the script? And she said, I don't know how to write a script, which, thank goodness she said that. And I'm still, to this day, friendly with her and see her, and she's a great writer.
Have you ever thought about talking to her about producing any of her other works?
She and I worked on a little project years ago at Sundance that was based on a short story, but I don't think we ever thought of one of her other novels, no.
Not too late. Another question over here.
Hi there. First of all, congratulations. I just was blown away by the film. I am not familiar with the actual book, and I'm curious. I have somewhat of a relationship with Joan Micklin Silver, and I know in Hester Street, for example, the novel that it was originally based on was based on the character of the husband, and Joan kind of put the focus on the Carol Kane character, Gittel, in the film. Was there a shift in the film adaptation from the book, or was the focus kind of the same, where there's a lot of focus on the male character?
Well, we don't even meet Laura in the book until fairly late, right?
No, it was always about Charles.
Yeah, Charles was always the center of it.
But I have a question for the audience. Let me see how to phrase this. How did you guys react to some of the stuff that if this movie was made now would have had to be cut out and would have caused lots of trouble?
You mean like, I'm gonna rape you, Laura?
I'm gonna rape you, I'm gonna beat you up. I mean, he essentially stalks her for the entire movie. Did any of the younger people have a reaction to that?
Over here.
I definitely did.
And this will be the last question, because
I definitely did. Like, I'm 16, so all the things you do in high school is just like, if someone says they're gonna beat you up, like, you should leave them, like, now, really fast. So I thought it was interesting because Laura's reaction wasn't what I expected it to be. You know, she doesn't confront him about the "I'm gonna rape you" comment. She doesn't really talk to him about that. She just kind of takes it in with a grain of salt as part of their dynamic. So I thought it was really interesting. Like, it's not just what he says that would be different now, it's how she'd react.
Which is cool.
Well,
That's fascinating.
Unfortunately, we've got to wrap this up, but thank you all so much for coming and
Thank
talking
you.
about this movie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ira.